With up to 140 tanks expected, Ukrainian crews have begun training on equipment that is much more modern than the Russian tanks currently in use. Since the summer of 2022, Ukrainians have been clamoring for battle tanks to launch a counter-offensive against Russian troops. In January, after months of talks, Kyiv finally obtained the promise of 120 to 140 Western tanks from a coalition of 12 countries. While waiting for their arrival, Poland announced on Friday, February 24th, that it had delivered its first armored vehicles. Ukrainian soldiers must be trained in these unfamiliar machines. In recent weeks, the first crews have begun training on Leopard 2A6 tanks in Germany and Poland, as well as on the Challenger 2 in the UK. Oleksiy Danilov, the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, believes it is possible to train his troops on Western tanks in 3 to 4 weeks. But Western tank commanders and land warfare analysts are more skeptical. On a fairly simple old-fashioned tank, with a crew that has what we call armored prerequisites, that is, they've been in a tank turret before, the training can go fairly quickly, said Jan Boivin, an armored equipment specialist and creator of the blog BlaBlaCars. Still, he estimated that this could take from 5 to 8 weeks. The expected equipment, however, is more modern than the Russian tanks currently being used in Ukraine. They're heavier because they're better protected against mines and anti-tank missiles, but they're also more mobile. They can locate targets and shoot at a greater distance, up to 5,000 meters. Western tanks are not designed like Russian tanks, where ergonomics are less of a consideration, said Boivin. This former officer in the armored cavalry arm of the French army underlines the necessity of adapting to the technology, something that risks lengthening the delays of already intense training, based on 6 days a week and 12 hours a day, with courses in translation. In addition to technical training, there is also tactical training. After training a crew, it must be taught to maneuver, to operate as a platoon, 4 tanks, and then a squadron, 13 tanks enrolled in an inter-arms battle group, ITG. It's complicated to train soldiers from an army that isn't applying its own doctrine. I can't see myself forcing French thinking on the Ukrainians, said Jan Boivin. He then added, I think that tactical training will be minimal, on safeguard measures and basic measures, and will be adapted to the terrain. Above all, the Ukrainians will find themselves with a collection of equipment of various origins, with many different spare parts and ammunition. Their supply and maintenance will be a logistical headache. The same goes for their transportation from the Polish border to the front line. They won't use the railroad, but tank carriers carrying one vehicle at a time and taking different routes. The Russians know this, and they aren't going to try to destroy one tank at a time with missiles, but rather wait for the Ukrainians to bring them within range of their artillery. We have to assume in principle that these tanks will be observed. We'll have to make arrangements, move them around at night and scatter them during stops, said Jan Boivin. We'll see leopards on fire, said Colonel Reisner.